Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Africa's Business Heroes Scale Up Meet the Heroes event. If you don't know me, my name is Tahira Hardy, and I am the Community and Operations Officer here at Africa's Business Heroes. And I'm joining you today from our office in Kigali, Rwanda. We are super excited to have you all with us today. And for those who are worried they might miss anything, the session is being recorded and we will add it to our website and YouTube channel early next week. So if you miss any insights that Amadou and Yvette shared, don't worry, you'll be able to rewatch the session later. So before we get started, kindly note that there is live French translation available for this event. So if we have any Francophones listening in, please join the French channel so you can follow with us in real time to ensure that you don't miss anything. So let's get right into it. I would like to welcome our heroes Yvette Ishimwe and Amadou Daffy, who both prepared insightful presentations to share with us today. But before we get into their keynotes, we're going to do a quick hero hot seat to get to know them better using a picker wheel. So Amadou and Yvette, can you kindly turn your cameras on and say hi to all of our lovely attendees?
I can't turn mine on. It says you need to do something to allow me.
Let me double check the permissions. So while I get it started, Amadou, how are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful. How about you?
I'm doing good. It's good to have you with us. It's been a minute since I've seen you. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, our headquarters.
Okay, great. You should be able to turn your camera on now, if I'm not mistaken. There we go. So good to see you. Okay. Hi, Yvette.
Hi, Tahira. How are you?
Good, good. How are you? I believe you're joining us from the States, so we're a little bit all over the globe today.
Thank you. It's great to be here as well.
Okay, so let's get right into it. So as you can see, they're pretty easy questions for you guys, but I'm going to do the picker wheel so we randomly see who gets to answer what. So ladies first, Yvette, I'm going to spin it. Let me know when you want me to stop.
Oh.
Okay. So Yvette, what is your favorite place to visit?
Botswana.
Yeah? Why Botswana?
I think I'm really in love with Botswana. The beautiful parks, great, wonderful landscape, beautiful people. I just really fell in love with Botswana recently, and I think it's my favorite place to visit.
Oh, wow. I haven't been yet, but if we have anyone from Botswana on the call today, please drop a message in the chat to say hi. So next up, Amadou. Let's see which one comes your way. Yeah, what is the most useful advice that you've gotten? This can be either personal or business. I put it up to you.
Learn how to compete.
Learn how to compete. Is that in your personal life or use it across all spheres?
I think it goes across because once you but personally, sometimes you can, be a little bit more agile because then people don't like you want to compete all the time, right? But in principle, well, this was for my mentor when I was maybe 19 years old, and I was sort of battling the fact that there was some inequality where I was living. I'm not going to be in detail. And what he said was, well, human beings, we were born to either be very sociable or compete to create that social environment that you want. So that triggered something in my head. And ever since, I always wanted to compete, not necessarily win, but compete to show what I'm capable of. So.
Yeah, that's good advice. So Yvette, back to you.
Oh,
Another tough one. What is a difficult sacrifice that you've had to make?
wow. Do I remember this? A difficult sacrifice. I think one of the difficult sacrifices that I've made was to quit a job before I started my business. Yeah, that was a big one, I think.
Yeah, what were you doing before you started Ariba?
I had a job in some international NGO. I was dealing with supporting some farmers with business development. And so leaving that comfort of, getting, a good salary, comfortable, and deciding to actually quit that with my business, which was not yet really making any income for me. It was a big decision. And I think, as much as I remember, that was one of the difficult decisions and sacrifices that I've made.
Okay. Would you do it again with what you know today?
I will definitely do it again and again. And I think that was, even though it was a difficult sacrifice, but I'm happy that I made that decision.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, Amadou. Let's see what you get. Oh yeah, a little bit of a follow-on from what Yvette was talking about. Why did you become an entrepreneur? Unless you're going to mention it in your presentation and you're saving it for later.
Yeah, can I get another one? Because that's a long one, right? Maybe I can get the food or
Okay, let me, yeah, let's spin a game. It really wants you to answer this one. Let me hide it. There you go. What's your favorite food and why?
Shell food, like crabs, shrimps, anything that has shell seafood type of thing, I love.
Yeah, and then Yvette, you get the last one. How do you de-stress?
I think I deal with stress first by deciding that. So I decide that I'm going to relax. And after putting that in my mind, then I try to do something that, helps me to relax. Would be watching my favorite show, sitting somewhere alone, having some alone moments, quiet, with a cup of tea. That helps me really to relax. And yeah, that's really how I deal with stress.
Okay, I'm gonna hand that one over to you as well, just so you get a full 3-2. How do you de-stress? Similar to Yvette or a little bit different?
Gym every day. Hour and a half, 200 push-ups. Not at once, 20 at a time. 20 sets at a time.
And that keeps you nice and grounded.
Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you so much, Amadou and Yvette. So next up, we're going to go right into Yvette's keynote. So Amadou, we'll come back to you in a little while. But first up, Yvette Ishimwe. So Yvette is the founder and CEO of Ariba Water Group Rwanda. Her keynote today is going to be about the nuances of fundraising as a social entrepreneur, which she is no stranger to from her experience successfully securing funding from a diverse range of sources for Ariba. Ariba Water Group is a social enterprise established to improve people's livelihoods by offering affordable and innovative water solutions and creating decent jobs for youth in Africa. They believe that when it comes to providing safe water, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Hence, their innovative solutions are bundled through 4 offerings, each targeted to a different customer segment. So Yvette was an ABH 2021 Top 10 Hero, and she has more recently been named a Cardia Women's Initiative Regional Winner, Forbes 30 Under 30, and Youth Adapt Challenge winner, among other things, because otherwise the list would keep going on. I know that you've been doing very well lately. So after her presentation, we're going to have a short Q&A with Yvette, where some lucky audience members will get the opportunity to ask Yvette their questions live. So put your questions in the chat, and we will select a few people who will then get to, pick Yvette's brain a little bit further. But without further ado, Yvette, over to you. I will share your.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tahira. As you said, my name is Yvette and I'm from Rwanda. And I would like to share with you, some of the, I would say, hints or strategies that I personally use for fundraising for my social enterprise. Of course, it's a learning journey every day, it gets better. So yeah, I'm not an expert, but yeah, I'm really happy to share what I've been able to learn so far. So I would like to start by sharing with you some of the key steps, because like before getting into fundraising, there are some of the key steps that I found are quite important to finish before starting the journey to fundraise, to be able to be successful. And one of those, the first one is really to have a clear business model, mission and impact. So definitely, maybe most of the people who are with us today, you already have a business. But sometimes we have these businesses, but the mission, the business model, the impact is not yet very well kind of structured. So it's very important to clearly articulate your social enterprise's mission, and be able to have a clear idea of what kind of positive impact that business, that social enterprise aims to create. And number two is really to have like a clear business plan, because sometimes we might confuse social enterprises with nonprofit initiatives, and you'll just be having this great thing, it has a great impact, but there is no clear way of how you're generating revenue, what is the business model behind what you're doing. And so it's just really about impact, about maybe if it's in education, helping kids to go to school, giving them scholarships, but how do you make money to be able to sustain that work? So if there is not a clear business model, then it's better maybe to consider your organization as a nonprofit instead of maybe saying that it's a social enterprise. So when you decide that it's a social enterprise, it's very, very important to have clear way of making money, generating revenues that can sustain your organization's financials. And number two, to have a clear target market. As entrepreneurs, sometimes we have too many great ideas. And when you're asked of what your company does, you have so many things that you're doing, be it in clean water and then clean energy and then clean everything and then, a lot of things. And the target market, the target goals are not very clear or elaborated. And so that can be very tricky for you to move forward with being able to successfully fundraise. So it's very important to have clear goals and target impact and target market. And of course, be able to have a growth strategy. So what's next? Apart from, supporting this community, how do you plan to grow? And being able to have that growth strategy very clear upfront will help you a lot. And I'm sharing this because when I started Iriba, I didn't have this information before. And I'm sure if I had this, if I had prepared well, like the growth strategy, the revenue model, the target impact, it would have been maybe easier and faster for me to be able to successfully fundraise. So it's been really a journey of learning, but this is really the first key step. Then number two is to be able to implement pilot projects. So if you say maybe you're dealing with clean cooking fuels, for example, or clean water, or education or stuff like that, it's really good that you can think of how can we implement some pilot projects. They don't need to be too big, however small it is, but it really makes a huge difference in terms of being able to showcase tangible evidence that your social enterprise is effective, can be successful, because you have data, you have testimonies, you have things that like really on ground that proves that really you're capable to implement your mission. So that's very, very important to be able to implement some pilot projects to be able to show, convince investors or donors. And yeah, I think that's really one of the second biggest steps that one needs to make before starting the fundraising part. And the third step is to be able to establish impact metrics. So this is where we use kind of measurable impact metrics to demonstrate our social enterprises' effectiveness and return on investment. And this can be, for example, connecting your impact to maybe the sustainable development goals. If it's, let's say, if you're creating jobs, then you are working towards addressing the SDG for decent work and economic development. If you're dealing with something to protect the environment, then you're dealing with maybe climate action or something like that. So inform yourself about maybe something like SDGs or stuff like that, and see how you can combine, how you can relate your business or your social enterprises target impact or impact metrics to that. And that will help you to easily communicate your enterprise impact and so forth. And always remember that less is more. You don't need to be able to, you don't convince funders that you're so impactful by maybe showing that you can address all the SDGs, for example. Not necessarily that. Even if it can be 3, 4, 2, 5 SDGs that you think are really, really relevant to your work, that you can be able to measure that impact with your work, then relate that. That's very, very key. So once you've been able to complete these key steps, then you can move now you can start your fundraising journey. You can now move to the next stage of now like tailoring or crafting great fundraising proposals and stuff like that. And so yeah, can you move to the next slide? So yeah, then with the key steps, when you've been able to clearly articulate your business model, mission, and impact, you've been able to implement some pilot projects, even if it's really at a small scale, it means a lot to the donors and funders. And 3, you've been able to establish some impact metrics, so you know what you're going to measure with your work. Then now you're ready to actually start the actual fundraising. And one of the first tips that I've seen really that works is to be able to tell a story behind your work. So be able to craft some compelling narratives about your social enterprise and the lives that it touches to be able to emotionally connect with potential funders. Someone once shared with us that donors or investors, they invest not because of the logic, but because of how they were able to connect with you emotionally. So it's very, very important that you really, you are able to craft a compelling narrative. You don't need to make up a fake story, but this can be something real, something, for example, that concerns, let's say, your target customers. If it's maybe these are kids who have been missing school because of water-related illnesses, and I'm able maybe to pull out maybe a name of one of those kids and say, Yvette or whoever is a kid somewhere in a rural area, she has been missing school, la 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 la, and now she's able to, go back to school because of our work. Something like that. Really be able to craft a compelling narrative about what you are doing, like the lives that you're touching. And it might be even better if you are able to actually, if it's something that has that resonates with you personally. For example, it's a personal experience that inspired you to start that particular initiative, that particular work. That's even better. So be able to kind of, craft a story that tells why you're doing what you're doing. That's very, very important. Next slide. Then the second tip is on being able to now research funding opportunities. It requires a lot of work. So it's not, when it comes to fundraising, sometimes it can feel like a full-time job, really. But it's very important because we need money to grow our impact, to implement these great ideas, these great initiatives. So be ready to put in work and time. And with that, of course, it goes with researching the funding opportunities out there. You can use resources such as funds for NGOs, Terra Viva grants. There's so many of those. Maybe I will share a couple of links in this slides. I'm not sure if they're gonna be shared, but there is really a number of resources out there which can show, upcoming or open funding opportunities. So make time to research about that and make a plan. So after you identify relevant funding opportunities that align with your work, with your mission and goals, then make a plan, create a schedule. One of the ways that I use is to create something like a quarterly fundraising plan and say, there is this open opportunity, the deadline is this, and this is the link. And I write some notes in the Excel sheets and say, I have to work on this before this time. And then I give myself enough time to prepare that. So you don't really work on last minute. Avoid doing proposal writing at the last minute, because that can really impact greatly the outcome of your fundraising efforts. So when you do it on time, you have enough time to prepare, you're not on rush, you are able to think, brainstorm, maybe be able to ask for feedback if you have some experts or consultants or some friends or colleagues that you can consult before submitting something, then you are able to have enough time to actually do that. So it's very, very important to create a schedule so you're always ahead of the game. Another way is to also check on people who are doing some pretty much similar work as you do. Check on their websites who are their past donors or funders, and research on those people, because they might be also relevant contacts for you. Next slide. Then another tip is really to be able to craft a compelling and customized proposal. One mistake that I used to make in the past was, for example, I have made an application for ABH competition. And then if I see another open opportunity, I'll just copy paste, problem statement, copy paste there, copy paste. And maybe in 10, 15 minutes, you're done with an application and just submit. That way, you just check boxes and say, hey, I've maybe completed 100 applications, but really they're not that compelling. They're not going to connect, to resonate. They're not going to persuade the funders. So it's very important that, in as much as, of course, the problem that you're addressing isn't changed or and your work or your solution hasn't changed. But it's very important to also research before drafting a proposal. It's very important to see what are the key focus areas for the donor. If, for example, your business is addressing, let's say, 4 key impact metrics, like key, let's say 4 SDGs. Maybe you are addressing education, good health and well-being, maybe in climate change or climate action. And you see that this donor is really more into climate action, then in as much as you're going to really talk about the great work that you're doing to address education and good health and well-being, but it's very important that you capitalize the part where your work is impacting the climate action. So you have to customize your proposal in such a way that it resonates with what the funder is looking for. So it's, of course, as you understand, this is not something that you can do on a last minute thing. It's not something you can do within maybe 1 hour or 30 minutes. It's something that you need to think about, prepare, give it enough time to be able to kind of be relevant to what the donor is looking for. And so, yeah, be able to highlight very well and very clearly the problem that you are addressing, do some research so that you're not just addressing something that's in your mind or in your head, but it's something with facts and statistics, and say, XYZ number of people do not have access to clean water, for example. It's not just me wanting to solve this problem, but there is numbers, there is statistics out there that shows that really what we're doing, what we're addressing is a real problem for a number of people, and show how relevant your project will provide a sustainable solution to that. And yeah, so being able to use data and evidence with that pilot project that you've been able to implement, you can say, yes, for example, you are addressing a problem that is impacting, let's say, about 300 million people. But so far with your pilot, you've been able to reach, let's say, 2,000 people or 500 people. That's okay. But it shows that if you've been able to reach 500 people, then you can really craft something that can assist or help more than thousands of people. And you don't need to show that you will solve the problem for the whole world, but it just needs to show that you are doing something, one step at a time, and you shall get there. So that's really the reason why having a pilot project is very, very important, because that way you have data and evidence to show that your approach is effective and can really solve the problem that you just mentioned. Next slide. And the next tip is to be able to show sustainability. When it comes to social enterprises, one of the unique parts of it is we are able to create impact, but in a sustainable way. So it's very important to be able to illustrate in your proposals, in your applications, how your social enterprise will continue its impact beyond that grant period. If you're asking for $50,000 as a social enterprise, it's not very, very clever to show that maybe it's just money to pay employees, pay rent, and that's it. So after paying that, then what's next? Because you're not a nonprofit, you are a social enterprise, and you have to show that this grant, if they give you $50,000, it's going to move you to the next step where you can really continue that work without necessarily having another grant. So that's very important, and be able to come up with a well thought out end game plan, like a scaling strategy that proves your enterprise's long-term sustainability plan. When it comes to end games, it can be, do you plan to franchise? Do you plan to do this so the government maybe can adopt that initiative? Do you want to sell it at the end of the day? So it's better it's very good and very important to have that idea in mind, and be able to also showcase that you have that in mind. What is going to be your end game and how do you plan to scale your work? And lastly, last slide is to be able to build strong partnerships and engage with funders. And this can be, if possible, engage with potential funders early on. That helps a lot. And you can do that by attending some networking events, webinars, conferences, webinars like these. For example, now you get to know about, for example, like ABH. So you know, next time if you're going to apply, this is how to go about it. Conferences and stuff like that, to be able to build relationships and understanding and understand the funders' priorities, so that you're able to craft your proposals, your applications that make sense to them. And seek partnerships with other organizations. Sometimes when we're, for example, just studying, it's very, very important to show that we have people in our network, we have partners that share similar goals, and this can really enhance the credibility and reliability of our work, and of course can boost, you know, access to resources. So if there is any potential partnerships that you think you can leverage, please tap into that. That's very, very important. And remember that raising funding for a social enterprise, for an initiative can be challenging sometimes. So it's very, very important to have the perseverance and adaptability into the process. Those are very, very essential things. You will get lots of regret to let you know. So don't be discouraged. And that doesn't mean that your work isn't impactful. It just means maybe that's not the right funder for you. So never give up, just continue to, you know, reach out to more, but of course also be flexible to adapt accordingly. Sometimes the feedback that you might receive from some donors, for those who provide feedback, it can help you to refine your approach and adapt it accordingly and be able to kind of, you know, go with the market dynamics. Also, don't just be rigid and say, no, this is where I started from. No, it's not necessarily that. If it's important that maybe you adapt some things, be open to that. And that can really make a big difference. So I think that's it from my end. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Yvette. So what we're going to do is we're going to invite some people to ask you their questions live. I see we got 5 in the Q&A. So first up, I'm going to get, can David Okori Obiro, can you please raise your hand so I can see you, and then I will give you permission to speak. And you can ask your question to Yvette live, because I see you've got a good one on the chat. So there we go. David, I've allowed you to talk. So please unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question to Yvette. David Obiro, are you there still with us? Otherwise, I'm going to go on to, I see we've got 5 hands that have popped up. No luck with David. Okay, next up, I'm gonna, there we go. Hi, David. No luck, I can't hear him. But if that David's question was, how and when do you evaluate and monitor the funded projects? So he said, how and when do you evaluate and monitor your funded projects?
Mm-hmm. How and when do you evaluate?
Yeah.
Okay. Not sure if I got the question very clearly, but I think when it comes to when you think is the right time to raise funds for your project. I think it's some of the key steps that I shared early on, things that you need to do, at least to have in place before you start fundraising, so that you can be able to at least make sense to a number of donors or investors. And the first is to be able to have a clear mission and vision for your business, for your social enterprise, have a clear business model, have a clear way of how you're going to track your impact. And then number two, if you can do some pilot projects, that will be very, very helpful to show that really your enterprise is quite effective and can create the impact that you claim to create. So those are really some of the key things that you need to have in place before starting to approach some donors or funders.
Thank you, Yvette. So next up, I see a hand from Okeke Victor. So Okeke Victor, I've allowed you to talk. You can unmute yourself and ask Yvette your question.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. I've been wanting to ask for startups that are into tech, and maybe there are many aspects of the business that is not completely up and running, is an idea. So how can we go about it to be able to get funded in this kind of space?
Yeah. Thank you, Victor. That's a great question. So when it comes to the idea part, there is also a number of funding opportunities for startups that are still in the ideation phase. Maybe it can be really kind of small grants, capital to seed capital to help you pilot or test your idea. So they're out there, and one of the strategies I would say is really to do some research, invest in some time to do research on how you can identify those funding opportunities for the ideation phase kind of project. But as you're doing that, try your best, really. I always really advise this because it makes a big difference when you've done something, or when you can show that there is something that you're doing about your work. It's not just the idea, but you're doing something in some small way you can. It can easily convince investors that you're ready to implement your great initiative. So yeah, that's my advice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. So I think we've got time for one more question before I get Amadou up. So Nicholas Bry, I am going to allow you to talk. So feel free to ask Yvette your question.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Yvette. This was a very thorough talk, very helpful. I'm not familiar with the amount of funding in the social business. What is the typical range of funding or grants? Does it correspond to seeds funding, or is this other kind of amounts that we are talking about? Sorry for my French accent. Your accent is very, very beautiful. I'm impressed.
Thank you, Nicholas. Yeah, when it comes to the amounts, really it varies. It depends on the type of funders that you're looking for. And it depends, of course, also on the stage of the business. But for social enterprises, I would say really just be open. If you need money to do your work, be open. If it's just starting, for example, anything, even if it's 10,000, 5,000, just go for it. Because like one small step can help you to reach to the next biggest step. So when you can even show some funders that you've been able to raise, let's say the 10,000, and you manage that well, and you are able to reach a certain level of growth, then you can easily convince them to give you 50,000, and the next funder can give you 100,000. and from 100 to 500 to 1 million to 2 million to 10 million to whatever. So it's really a step-by-step kind of thing, and it's very important to be open to start small, especially when you're just starting, maybe to fundraise and your work is really, you know, a little bit in the early phases. It's important to be open to grab whichever opportunity that presents itself to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nicholas. And thank you so much, Yvette. We have quite a few people have put questions in the Q&A. So if you don't mind answering those, because I think they've got a lot of burning questions for you. And don't go anywhere, because we're going to have you back for a little fireside chat after Amadou's presentation. But next up, we have our second keynote from Amadou Duffy, who is the co-founder and CEO of Gebea. Today, he will be giving a keynote on how he has successfully navigated the different stages and sources of funding. So Gebea is a Pan-African online freelance talent marketplace headquartered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The company aims to become an active contributor to Africa's digital transformation and build a booming Africa through leveraging continental and global job opportunities for African talent. Amadou was the 2022 ABH Top 10 Hero. He's also our East African Connect lead. And once again, we'll give some lucky audience members the opportunity to ask Amadou their questions live. So make sure to have your hands ready after the chat. But Amadou, over to you for your presentation.
Absolutely. Do I present? Okay. Are you going to share, or I share my screen?
You can share your screen unless you'd like me to.
Yeah, it'd be better if you do. It's only 3 full
Okay.
slides.
Sure, give me 2 seconds and I'll bring it up.
So a bit of correction, we've moved to Gebea, which is a company I'm the CEO of. We morphed a little bit our business to something a little bigger than just a freelance talent marketplace. We have we're now what you call a SaaS-enabled marketplace. So what that means is pretty much whatever we learn from building our platform, we are cloning and copying it for others to do the same, whether they want to have a marketplace to match engineers, doctors, and so on and so forth. And part of even this funding story of Gebea is in line with that. So I'll talk about more of that. But I'm sorry, I didn't send you the most updated description of what Gebea is right now. So thank you for having us in this great kind of discussion, because most of the things I'm going to talk about has a lot of synergies with what Yvette does. The only difference is the fact that a social enterprise versus commercial for-profit, right? Gebea is more of a commercial for-profit with, of course, an impact element, but there's some similarities there. You see that. So for every growth economic system in pretty much around the world, you always have 3 very consistent pillars. One is the entrepreneurs, those who build a business, the capital, which allows them to scale their business or pivot or do whatever. And then you have the talent, meaning those people that got hired within the company to help them out. So pretty much the talk of today is around the capital side of things, right? And I'm going to focus on startup because that's what I know. And that's what the stage of Gebea is, right? And I'm going to focus on more on the, like I say, the commercial for-profit idea. For those who maybe want to see the nuance behind a startup. The startup can be in any particular sector. A social enterprise can also be a startup, but a startup is really defined as a company in the first stages of operations, right? They haven't made it to certain cycles. So if you keep that in mind, what I'm about to share, you can sort of follow through accordingly. Now, why even we are talking about fundraising, right? By default, if you're an entrepreneur that's just still clueless about why do you need funding, by default, entrepreneurs want to fund things themselves. They think their own money would allow them to grow the business, right? Which is very risky because just like Yvette, she left her job back in the day to start the company. It happened to me. The first hit that you'll get is the financial detriment you'll get to not get a salary anymore, the emotional aspect of saying, did I made a bad choice? and the social aspect of everybody telling you that you won't work and work. So, so with all of that pressure, you may want to take, at least the funding side to be, to be a little bit sort of more, what do you call it, manageable, by not necessarily taking everything you got and putting into idea that you only can believe and maybe people around us. So it's very important that the topic of funding is essential, because startup financing is the lifeblood of startup companies. Not every companies, I'm not talking about different companies, but startup itself, even the word startup, you're just starting up. It's the lifeblood of startup companies, okay? And just to give an idea, before I get to the first slide, the size of the financing for startups in Africa was estimated at $6.5 billion by one of our investors, Patek. Patek is one of the prominent investors in the continent. They've done a research in 2022. So it's growing pretty decently year on year. It's still very low if you compare it to what happens in the US or the Western world, or even Asia, where the startup on a yearly basis can go anywhere from $200 billion to $1 trillion, depending what kind of big rounds these startups are doing. That's also explained by the fact that in those countries, there's very, very sort of mature companies or startups that require a lot more capital. Whereby Africa, we only have a handful of unicorns. Unicorns are usually companies that's worth about $1 billion. So yeah, $6.5 billion for African startups in 2022. So here, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So this particular graph, you could just, if you're a startup, this is pretty much what you should look at, or have somewhere that you look at every now and then if you look at the fund. This is a startup funding cycle. So you have revenue and time. Maybe revenue also can be nuanced. It can be future revenue, meaning you can build a product where you're selling something, but you sell it at a freemium. Some of you remembered when Facebook launched and Google launched, they didn't have any services to offer for premium, right? They were offering mainly their services for free. And once they build up enough traction around it, they sat down and said, you know what, we're burning too much cash from funding. We need to figure out now how to make money. And then it turns into revenue, hence the Google ads, Facebook ads, and all that stuff. So they figure out a way to make money after they have a huge traction of using their service, of users using their services for free. So that's why the revenue line here can also be looked at pre-revenue in a sense. And then you have time. Now, this is a statistic that says 9 out of 10 startups will die naturally in the first 2 to 3 years, which is really at the seed stage, which is what Yvette was talking about. When you're at an early stage where you're not sure really that idea would work, but you have faith, you've seen enough indication that if it's the right idea, it can go big. So that's why most likely the people who invest into that particular area of your growth will be angels. We call them angel investors, or FFF, which stands for friends, families, and fools. Fools can be somebody that just like believe on you and just got a check for you, right? And usually what you're looking for is to build something that will break even at some point, meaning you stop bleeding money, you're actually not making a profit, but you're zeroing in into your business model. So that's why we call it valley of death. If you survive this, then you can be in a talk like this and do a presentation. We survived this part. That's why, I was lucky enough that ABH invited me to come and speak to you guys. And the next level of growth after this particular area is going from first level, second and third. And I'll go to the next slide to explain what that means. But in this stage between second and third, you're calling early stage startup, right? First, like I say, here's seed capital startup, but here you're early stage, meaning you still have a little traction, but you haven't done enough really to sort of, be a dangerous competitor or to have enough tractions where you have millions of users. Maybe you're around 50 to 100 users, to pay you some money and so on and so forth. So that's where this is where mostly venture capitalists, these are funders, organizations who usually fund you to own part of your business, whether it is to equity or some other mechanism. I'm not sure that. It may be possible also that you've done so much traction that somebody may acquire you, right? So another company that does something similar to you sees value in you, wants to expand their business, and they come and say, you know what, we want to acquire you. Or they want to merge, right? They want their business to merge with yours to get a bigger business, and the share equity of the business can still be split, or they just buy you out in a sense, right? or strategic alliances, which is what I really like. One of the slides that you've had mentioned to resonate for me is African startups or African businesses in general. There's two ways of doing this thing. Number one is you build your own ecosystem while you do your core business. So it's very frequent you see a business in Africa that has a core business they want to grow, but in order to survive, they build a bunch of other things around it to survive, to pay for the bills, right? And the other option that I've seen lately that works is you find a company or an organization that's moving so fast and you hold on to it and it pulls you, that partnership, right? So I think it's easier for sometimes for African businesses or startups to hang on to something that's already moving fast, especially if you don't have funding, to build you the traction that you need, rather than trying to build the ecosystem where you get frustrated, it takes too long to go, right? So this strategic alliance is very, very good. Then you have late stage startups, those guys who raise hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe, you know, they have traction to the roof. You take someone like ChatGPT's at this stage right now, right? They were funded by angel investors. They went through different cycle of funding, which of them Microsoft invested a lot of money. Now they're at the late stage thing. Now, the option now is that to what you call IPO. You go to the public market, people will actually buy your shares, right? When you hear some of these companies are worth billions of dollars, most of the time they're at the IPO stage, meaning public offering, right? At that point where the public can buy it, or secondary offering where the entrepreneurs themselves shares their own shares to the company or share to different kind of parties in a sense. Okay. So you can go to the next one. I only have 2 more slides. All right, so this is a little bit more on silo. So somebody asked, I think in the chat, you know, proof of concept stage and how do you fund it and so on and so forth. So that's that pre-seed, meaning you have an idea, right? It's an infancy. You don't have even people who believe in it. It's not even on paper yet. Well, you may be lucky you have it on paper, but you need someone to believe it. So looking for someone who got a check between 10,000 to 300,000. By the way, these numbers are not really, so they're very generic, but it fits very much in line where Debaya was. When we first started our company pre-seed, you know, I was able, between me and my co-founder, to raise $300,000 among ourselves. So that's what it is. We're at the FFF level where family and friends came together and help us out, right? So you're at that stage here, right? Your common element of growth is building a proof of life, showing the potential investors that you have something happen, right? Then once you get there, you get to seed. So you have your product up and running. An MVP stands for most valuable product, means something that you put out there to test, right? And you have users coming in, looking at your product, testing it. Some of them are spending money for it, and so on and so forth. You're not essentially large. You don't have thousands of customers, but you may have between 100 and 200, or even 10 to 50, depends on how sophisticated your product is or how much you price it. And then you also have what you call product market fit, meaning somebody wants your product. That's what product market fit is. The more people you have, the better investors will like, oh, you make this really an opportunity. If it's just your mom or dad or your brother who has, you know, love your product, then it may be harder to sell to investors. But if you have a group, you know, who people you don't even know who came into your product and bought a product from you, bought a service from you, then you actually have a product market fit. At that stage, you can easily raise between $1 and $3 million in Africa. These numbers again is in Africa. We were able to raise up to $4.5 million when we're here, but we're considered still at seed. Okay, now your product market fit, you're going out there, you're shaping how your business works. So I was correcting to her earlier and saying we're no longer freelance marketplace. We've seen something bigger. So now we say we need more money to prove that something bigger. That's Series A, meaning we already have revenue into the company, quite significant for the size of company we are in Africa, especially in Ethiopia and in Kenya, right? We've hired more people, we have branding, we have marketing, so on and so forth. Usually in Africa, you'd be lucky enough to raise up to $10 million in Series A, right? There's some who did more because their product was so successful, but in general, it's between $5 and $10 million on most startups. And once you're there, now you're at growth stage. Once you prove that you can raise $10 million, the investors will cut a check for you to grow, right? Then you get to the next phase, right? Where you go into new markets. So let's say you conquer the country, you're in Rwanda, you conquer Rwanda, but you see that there's a demand in Kenya for your product, get there. But to get there, you have to do whatever you did in Rwanda. So you guys more cash, right? That's where you go in and ask your investors to give you $15 to $20 million to get you to the next stage. Then you go to Series A, this is like large expansion. You've done Africa, you're successful in Africa, you're going to South America, or you're going to Asia, or you're going to America. one of the companies that's actually done it very well is Flutterwave. I don't know if you guys know it from Nigeria. They're a fintech company. Once they conquered the Nigerian market, they went to Series B, conquered other market in Kenya and some other countries. Eventually, they scaled up to the United States of America with the Series A amounts and become a unicorn, right? So these are the different level of what you see in terms of funding stage, your stage where you're at, the focus you want to be at, the element of growth, and then the amount. Can you go to the last slide? Right, so Gabea's story is a bit interesting because we did a mix of financing, which was Yvette was even mentioning. So we do have investors, venture capitalists who own capital into the company, right? Those likes of Orange Ventures, ICJ, which is a VC in Japan, Partech Ventures, you should look them up. They're pretty decent on their portfolio, and they really believe in companies that can scale in Africa. In Consonance Capital and Bullet, these are companies that own shares within the bank. So it was a little harder maybe to convince them to get there, right? But if you think that was hard, trying to become a hero at the African, the African Business Hero, that one wasn't easy because the same level of scrutiny you had to have for these investors who actually own part of the company, we have to go through to the African Business Hero. But the reason why I use that as a funding opportunity here, when we were part of the 20 winners, they gave us $100,000. And my ask was, I'm going to use this money, to sort of ramp up my technology team because I needed to hire more people, right? So indirectly, they invested into Gabea, although they don't want equity, right? They kind of helped along those lines. IFC is similar. But the biggest one lately that came was MasterCard Foundation. It's the wrong logo here, it should say Foundation. They gave us a contract of about $50 million to replicate Gabea 100 times in Ethiopia. That's a significant amount. So a VC may not be able to give me $50 million at the stage I am in because I need to get to a traction level. But MasterCard Foundation saw the opportunity of what we've done in this country and said, you know what, how much money do you need to do something bigger? And what would that look like? I said, well, I want to clone Gabea 100 times in Ethiopia in different sectors. So that's why I consider it as a different kind of funding because it's a contract coming in. So we've done anything from personal cash, we've done debt and equity, debt meaning loans, whether it's from a bank or from an investor who wants to get returns of investment based on interest rate. We've done equity funding, got grants, we've done large contracts, MasterCard. I'm just showing this one. There's others, but this is the most significant one. We've even got something creative because if you're building a tech company, your product is going to be online. If it's online, you need to host it. Now, if you have 10, 20 customers coming to your site, you're not going to feel the burden of the hosting cost. But when you have 20,000 people hitting your site, like we're doing right now on Gabea.com in terms of searching stuff within our site, your bill goes from $100 to $6,000 a month. Well, you better have a way to fund that. So companies like Microsoft, company like Google and AWS and some others are usually have these packages for entrepreneurs to help them navigate that growth stage until they really have enough revenue to pay them. For example, Microsoft Founders is a pretty good one where founders help take it back, which allows us to have, think about $100,000 and $150,000 worth of credit for hosting for a year. That way, it sort of allowed me to focus more the money I'm going to get from these investors and others into marketing and business operation rather than worrying about how do I pay for my next bill for my cloud services and stuff. So that's very important to also as a social enterprise, small business, using the internet a lot, you may reach out to these companies and say, can you give me credits for a year or two, right? Which will sort of help your cash flow for the rest of the stuff you want to do. So with that, I'll thank you for listening and I'm open for any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Amadou. That was very interesting, and I'm sure very interesting for our attendees as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a few people opportunity to ask you their questions live, but we had a good one in the chat. So how did Gabea survive the Valley of Death? Was there like a key decision that you made to get through before I hand over to the audience? I'd be curious to know.
Well, I think we were part of, like the story is 9 out of 10 startups die. So we were part of the one. There's a couple of things that maybe worked out for us. One, the resilience of the two co-founders. Our vision and mission and my passion is so big that failure doesn't even mean nothing. I think it's part of, so I have 3 passions. I always have passion for Africa, technology, and the people around. So when you have that in your head and what we're doing, which is pretty much helping Africa be globally competitive in the job marketplace and stuff. That resilience is different from someone who said, I want to create a startup because I want to make money. I want to be the next Facebook. I want to be the next Google. If you say that in Africa, it's a little bit more, not real, but if you're saying I'm here to build something so big that I can help millions of Africans be globally competitive, you have extra resilience. The second thing is I learned very fast, right? And I humbled myself when I moved back to Africa, because I spent a lot of time in the US, hence the accent. But I humbled myself when I moved back and learned that I'm here to learn the first 4 years. So I've been around for 7 years. The first 4 years, we're just learning. The last 3 years is when we raised money. Actually. All this money came the last 3 years. So that allowed me sort of to, that freedom of, or that willingness of learning allowed me to have a little bit more sort of protection on what was coming after. And last but not least, the problem we're trying to solve is very big as well. And the unemployment rate in Africa is so huge that investors will see the opportunity. So if they see you, pretty much saying you're a resilient entrepreneur, you have a big dream, the market size is so big, it's easier then to tell a story like Yvette was saying to an entrepreneur and say, you better cut a check or you're going to miss out on this opportunity. I'm going to be one of those 10 startups that survive, this valley of death. That's pretty much, I think, what happened.
Thank you. Very interesting. So now I'm going to hand over to some of our audience to ask you some questions. So if you have a pressing question for Amadou, raise your hand so I can unmute you. So Donald Ocean, I'm going to allow you to talk. So kindly unmute yourself and you can ask Amadou your question.
Okay. I had an investment proposal submitted to what we call in Uganda a START facility. START facility is funded by the EU, United Nations Capital Development Fund, and the government of Uganda through Private Sector Foundation and Uganda Development Bank. The investment proposal went through 4 stages of approval: the long listing, the short listing, and due diligence check. And also there was a pre-investment technical assistance provided by United Nations Capital Development Fund consultant. But somehow we did not make it. The reason was that the funding we were requesting was well above the threshold for the funding. And at the beginning of our application, they had advised us that we can go ahead, but they can leverage some funding from other financial institutions like Uganda Development Bank and Bank of Uganda. So somehow we failed to get the funding. So my question is, how do I place myself in a favorable position? How do I make myself appealing to ENCDF or the EU or that government of Uganda project so that I may be able to get a better chance next time when I apply? Or how do I place myself so that they can do that leveraging which they had promised? Yes, that was my question.
All right. Are you a social enterprise, a startup, or what line of business you're in?
Again?
Are you a social enterprise, a startup, or for profit? What line of business are you in?
Okay, it was an ISO EU value addition facility in the pig sector. We were supposed to buy a facility, a slaughter facility, and a pork processing facility in the pork value chain. And that would involve involving smallholder farmers as developing them as a supply chain, a kind of a hub model where we enter into contract with them directly, of course, with the inclusion of women, youth, and refugees, and scaling up, building out our convincing path for reaching out millions of those farmers. This project was in northern Uganda, which have gone through 2 decades of war, So, and then also working with the small roadside butcheries and market vendors for meat. So that was the line, so that we can access export markets and the high-end domestic markets. I hope I've clarified.
No, you did. Yeah. So maybe this would be more for Yvette too, because it's a blend of social enterprise, but with some sustainability model that can be for profit. But let me give you an example. One of the things I always never wanted to do for Gabea was raise money that's tied into these donors organizations. Because for me, one of the goals that I have for Gabea is hopefully I become a unicorn for Ethiopia, which is worth $1 billion. And the only way you can be a unicorn is people paying you for a price of your share that they think is good, right, on the market, right? So this pay that can be, say, someone coming and give you $200 million for equity, or you're lucky enough to go IPO, okay? So for me, if I took money from AU or some other organization, I'm pretty much working for them because they have a very clear mandate for me. I can't dictate what I want to do, right? They're going to allow me to do that. And if you execute that, you get what you call a delivery fee, which is 5–10% in general of the total amount. So you get $100 million, but you only got $10 million that you need to justify to do the work that's on their mandate. So, but that thing broke for me when MasterCard Foundation came. So people ask me, what did MasterCard Foundation brought you as value? I said, well, they're giving you $50 million. They want you to replicate yourself 100 times. That's what I told them I wanted to do. I didn't tell them, because I'm going to create this number of jobs, I'm going to copy what Gabea does, and I'm going to sell my core product to those companies, which is a SaaS solution. And I'll advise them accordingly. Are you willing? See, that's in line with me growing my company, and I can only do it in Ethiopia anyway. So if I wanted to do it in Kenya and other countries, I can get qualified funding, which is equity funding to get that done. So there's a nuance there. If I were you, I'll probably focus on building something that's a little bit more private, controlled. That way you can dictate a bit of what you want to do or what you want to mandate. Because if you're a social enterprise, go with their mandate, because your heart is to help as many people as possible. But if you want to build a valuable company, which is in my case, I needed to dictate a little bit the way I wanted to go with it. So maybe Yvette can give you advice on how would you position yourself with the social enterprise. But for me, I can only tell you, hustle your way to build something so valuable that they have to play with. MasterCard Foundation, when they saw it's like, this is one of the players in Ethiopia doing things. Can we work with them? You position yourself in the global competitive things what I was talking to Tahira. You make yourself competitive for them to cut a check for you to do what you want to do.
Thank you, Amadou. I'm sure. So next we have a question from Funmi. So Funmi, I've given you permission to talk. So kindly unmute yourself and ask Amadou your question.
Hi, Amadou. Thank you so much for the very wonderful insights shared. I think my question is around valuation, and I've heard quite a number of confusing lines from even industry experts. I just wanted to know how you were able to navigate this at the Series A round, for instance, or at any stage. What's the typical valuation for a Series A round? And some say the willing buyer is a willing seller, and it depends on how much you're able to negotiate. But you also want to make sure that you're representing something that will not scare investors away, but you're not also undervaluing your company. So I just needed to have some kind of guidance on that.
So depends on where you are. Valuation depends on where you are. Are you pre-revenue or you revenue?
We're revenue, nearly $1 million a year for the last 2 years.
Is it net or is it gross?
Gross of nearly $1 million.
Okay, so in my experience, I have two kinds of investors that value us differently. The one that I like, which is a little bit more realistic, was they use our net revenue monthly, and there's a formula around that. If you want, I can later send you a formula if we exchange information. A formula around that to do it in a way where they take your net revenue in a given month, time it 12, because there's a possibility of you repeating that, times your what they call it, the multiplier. The multiplier is really, if you're a revenue generating company, the multiplier is really what you can negotiate. The multiplier of your business, right? For example, about before COVID, no, before this semi-recession we had, right, with the war in Ukraine and all of that, the multiplier for most fintech companies in Africa was about 15 times or whatever, right? So you see someone who will barely make $100,000, right, takes that revenue times 12 times, 15 times more what they actually valued. But immediately after this thing happened, a recession and investors are backing off, that multiplier went to 5 immediately. So you have companies who were worth $200 million of when the valuation went down because the multiplier is what affected it. So what made me careful was I was always looking at my competition, what multiplier they're paying in, and I always put myself in a lower multiplier. That way, I don't get into an argument immediately on what it's worth. But because we're a revenue generating company, my whole focus was to make sure my revenue is always on point, right? If I was 100, do I want to raise 100? Let me go $300,000 net revenue a month. If I do that, whether the multiplier changes or not, because I fixed it in a certain number, I can grow. I'm in control of my own revenue rather than multiplier. That's how I see it, right? How I survive these arbitrary valuations of company. I hope that helps.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you, Funmi and Amadou. So I think we got time for one more before we get a bit back. So Chionma, I've given you permission to talk, so kindly unmute yourself and you can ask Amadou your question.
Hi, Amadou. Hi, Tahiri. My question is, when you were raising in the early stages, would you say that your academic credentials was like pivotal or like essential or considered when investors were, because I often hear that investors invest in people more than they invest in ideas. So like that's like one thing. Then secondly, my second question is, your opinion about like a social enterprise versus like a private equity company or like a regular standard limited liability company. If, for example, you had your own personal ambitions for social impact or social change or whatever it is there a route to building a company that is, heavily reliant on like creating some kind of social change without necessarily being incorporated or registered as a social enterprise?
Okay, let me stay away from the second question because I'll say something controversial, but let me go back to the first one. I never use my credentials from my degrees even if you look at my LinkedIn profile, you only see where I started, when I started becoming an entrepreneur. Because entrepreneurs, degree will allow you to sort of maybe navigate issues here and there. That's what I believe. For example, I was trained as a software engineer, so I know how to build products. So my natural instinct was to build Gabera, which is Upwork, like Upwork for Africa, right? But when you get into it, you realize, okay, well, how do I build a financial model? Well, how do I learn these different stages? So you realize you're always going to be sort of handicapped, or if you're really, really good at it, maybe, that imposter syndrome to some point where you realize, they figured it out. So for me, in my opinion, the degree doesn't matter. What matters is how you articulate in your conviction about what you want to do and what you do for that. For example, I left the United States, I was making, I don't say it, I was making 6 figures as an enterprise application architect, my last job, managing, I don't know, 50 to 60 people in the company at the time. So that comfortable life that I left and moved to Ethiopia, right? So some of you wondered why is Ethiopia, right? Because a lot of these startups, tech things don't happen in Ethiopia. It could have been in Kenya, South Africa, and so on and so forth. When an entrepreneur sees that, they say, this guy's crazy, or this person is crazy enough to leave everything they built to move to a country because they believe in his idea. So they see a champion. Okay, all right, what's his background? Oh, he's an engineer, so we know how to do this. Okay, cool. They don't dwell too much about what kind of degree I have, although I have a master's degree in information system and a bachelor in computer science. It didn't bother them much, right? That what they really wanted to know is what are you about? So at your seed or pre-seed level, hands down, it's the person or the co-founders who are building the company. Now, if you were a former entrepreneur and you failed and all of that type of stuff, your degree may help, right? Okay, you failed before, your degree may help as intake. So they're looking for something new. Well, what can be different from this person? But it's really the conviction initially of the entrepreneur that will get you, even your family, to cut a check. You have to be very like a bulldog, right? For them to cut the check. Now, let alone an investor who doesn't know you, but see something that's so different than anybody else. Because you may find 50 people who have the same degrees, right? They want to be entrepreneurs, but the different factor is how much of conviction and resilience this person can do. Can it win? Can he win? And investors want exciting people. Right? If the idea is not exciting, the person is not exciting, they're not going to invest, especially on the equity side, because they want something big. They want the mind of someone who's want to moonshot something, not necessarily someone who wants to grow month over month. And that's that excitement. You can only get it not from a degree, right, but from who you are in sort of as a person, where you live, right. That's why some of the entrepreneurs in Nigeria have more grit. They convince investors faster than someone from Kenya, Ethiopia, or Francophone country where they struggle a little bit or even convincing them. So that's my opinion on it. Okay, the social enterprise, that's what I did, by the way. I started an organization with some friends of mine called Coders for Africa, because I wanted to make sure I have enough developers and technologists in the continent before I make the move. I'll have that foresight. And I built a reputation among the community of software developers and stuff that, this guy cares about building an army of software developers in Africa. You get me? And it took me about 2 to 3 years, which allowed me to navigate across the continent. I went to, I think, about 6 African countries initially with Coders for Africa, while still doing my job in the US and stuff. Once I was ready now, I knew enough of Africa and enough of these people, what they need. That's when I decided, you know what? Let me go and build a private company, because these guys, they ask me for money now. They want a job, they want this. So that pivot from being a social entrepreneur went very quickly to a private one once I built the confidence, right? I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think you can do both at the same time, one after the other, or do it, start off with the social enterprise with the for-profit thing, which is a little harder to build in my opinion, but that's what I want to say about that.
Thank you. Thank you. Helpful, very.
Thank you, Chioma, and thank you, Amadou. Yvette, are you still with us? Can I bring you back up for 1 or 2 more questions with you and Amadou before we close up for the day? I know there's a lot of people who really want to learn more from Amadou, but we are a little bit limited for time, unfortunately, today, but I'm sure we will have more opportunities in the future to get our heroes back. Amadou and Yvette, are you still with us?
Yeah, I was just getting a glass of water.
No problem, we've been talking a bunch. Yvette, are you still there too? Great, I see as well. So I've only got 2 questions for both of you that I think will be relevant from your different areas of expertise to hear. So is there a mistake that you've made on your fundraising journey so far that you think other people can learn from? That, like, if you had to go back, if there's one thing that you would change over what you've done, unless everything's sort of kind of gone the way that you hoped it would, and you're one of those, there's no mistakes, only lessons.
Yeah, for me, I think, yes, of course, failures and mistakes, of course, along the way were quite inevitable for me. But also, I think they're there for me to be able to learn. So I think I wouldn't change so much. But one of the things that I wish I could change if I go back is I would first refine the business model before engaging any investor, because I saw that in the beginning, we'd raised some funding, which we didn't use really, really well, as much as I would like to have used it, basically because we were not clear enough about what the business model is going to be. You know, we had clear idea about the impact and stuff, but the business model wasn't clear yet. And so, you know, we really made some mistakes in terms of the type of funding that we raised in the beginning, which includes some commercial capital that we took, which I personally believe it wasn't the right time for us to take that. So yeah, that would be something that I would change, definitely. And I think it was really because of that, the lack of clarity on the business model, on the revenue, you know, generating strategy. We didn't have that in place yet.
Thanks, Yvette. What about you, Amadou? I saw you nodding your head. So I
Yes,
wonder if some of the challenges are similar.
Same story. It's not one mistake, it's how many mistakes. What kind of mistake did you not make in your fundraising, right? Being overly confident, thinking, oh, you can go out there and raise $10 million because you see your competitor doing it. Not being able to build enough traction for you start showing, not even be able to understand business hard enough and thinking you can go raise money because you know, especially coming someone like me to see people raising $1 million over coffee for an idea. You know, I mean, that mentality of the US, trying to bring that in Africa, you realize you'll never raise. At some point, you at some point feel like, I'm never going to raise, right? But if you build a business and you really build your traction, you'll be undeniable. There's more of that. So if I had to really fix something, was to very quickly figure out how do I build such a traction that I won't be denied on even having a seat at the table. One of the biggest problems I had was, I didn't know how to defend myself against the competitors. And my main competitor at the time was Andela. So every time I walked into investors' room, the first question they asked me was, how are you different than Andela? Because they raised so much money. You know, I was like, I just feel discouraged. I'm trying to defend myself, but that was the wrong strategy. But once I learned how to answer that, after 20 times or more, then it made it easy. So I said, listen, if your starting question is to talk about Andela, then you don't really see the opportunity. There's no point. You haven't done even due diligence on me or what I do by you asking me that question. So having those reflex of being able to say, you know, this is not for me, walk away, that came later after you do it so many times. But mistakes, tons of them. But one of the things I see for new entrepreneurs, they're afraid they think sending 3 decks to 3 investors will get them. You will have to talk to at least directly or indirectly about 150 investors to really start seeing some traction. Directly or indirectly, meaning some people saying you really need to see some traction. It's not easy. You have to pay your bills. If it was easy, everybody could raise money, right? So you have to pay the price in that sense, but mistakes, plenty of them.
So building on from what you're saying about how it's not easy, Amadou, I'm sure you've gotten a bunch of those along the fundraising journey, as have I'm sure many people on the call. So what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs to keep them engaged and to, you know, sort of encourage them to just keep going besides to just, you know, persevere and believe in your passion?
So for that one is the relationship. The first thing an investor will look in you is, can I trust you? Even what bank, if you're trying to apply for a loan for a bank, they ask you for collateral. They ask you so many things because essentially what they tell you, can we trust you? Now, if you apply it to an investor who's going to cut a check for equity, loans and stuff, it's the same principle. Can they trust you? At first they see you like, nah, and they have thousands of people talking to them anyway. One of the tricks I did was, there was 2 to 3 investors I love, for example, Pate. And I happened to kind of being introduced to the main person that I was accessible to. There's 3 of them, the partners, but there was one in particular. And I started building a relationship every month or so. I hit him up and send him an email. Hey, we've done this. And it brings the curiosity and you start building a relationship. They start inviting you into things. And next thing you know it, you know, and they want to be more serious, right? They even now vouching for you. They even introduce you to other investors. So relationship building. So investment from a VC or those guys who cut those kind of checks is more of a marriage. But dating, you have to date a lot. You can't just, it's not like an African wedding where you see someone, next month you get married. That doesn't work that way. It's more of dating to really, really they trust you and you trust them, right? It goes both ways. So that's what I would advise. Make sure whoever you want to be invested, don't take no as an answer. Just keep feeding them information every week, every month. Hey, look what we're doing. Look at our traction. We just did this. We did that. We just talked to these investors. What kind of advice can you give me? You have to really be able to navigate that communication. If I want to give anybody advice about fundraising.
Thanks, Amadou. Yvette, what about for you? Similar thoughts that you need to build those relationships up?
Yeah, I mean, that's very key, of course, in any case. Relationships are key. Maybe the second part is to be comfortable to grow gradually on your pace, like to pace your growth. Because sometimes as entrepreneurs, we're so hungry to achieve all the big stuff. And unfortunately, you might end up really making some big mistakes. If, for example, this is, let's say, an idea that you're just studying, so you're not even sure if it's going to work the way you think it's going to work. And maybe you just grab millions of dollars. Any investor who present themselves, you just grab the money, do it at a large scale. And if anything goes wrong, then it goes wrong so badly because this is something really huge. But when you accept to really pace your growth, be able to learn first, I think Amadou mentioned that in his presentation, really learning, investing in your learning as an enterprise, as a company, as with your team is very key before rushing into grabbing too much investments. So yeah, it's very important that you really pace your growth and first, then, be comfortable to even say no to some investments, because, that's when you don't need that investment. So yeah, that helps you a lot to be a bit more confident and not desperate to grab anything.
Thanks, Yvette. Yeah, I've heard that from someone else as well. That's the best time to get money is when you don't need it. And don't think that you always just need to get money. So I hope everyone has been taking notes. My last question for both of you, before I let you go, because I see we are a little bit over time, is we have our semi-finale rapidly approaching at the end of this month, happening right here in Kigali, Rwanda. Amadou, you were just part of it last year, also back here in Kigali. Do you have any advice for the hopeful entrepreneurs competing this year? Before I hand over to you, Matt.
Be ready to be emotionally shocked. When you turn around and see something like what's going on. So yeah, ABH really, for me, kind of validate my journey of an entrepreneur. Like every box, it really, and then I'm the kind of person I never wanted to, they know this about me, put myself out there. I don't believe that building a personal brand would directly affect your business. If it was, people write Uber, they don't know, like I said, who's the founder of Uber. They just write it because they love the product. A lot of people don't know who Jeff Bezos is, right? The founder of Amazon. They just love the product. I was in that mindset, but what ABH was doing, well, before you get there, you may want to tell your story. You may want to, be out there and sort of, people need to connect with why is it Gabay exists, right? And I think if I told a better story, I would have told the spot from Tesh, my friend Tesh, but it's that storytelling that be in the moment, pretty much. I think we were in the moment of what's going on around us, and you have thousands of people watching you online, nervous as hell, emotionally, you're all over the place. Look out for something that's great. Be yourself. We are really each individuals at the, when we were in South Africa, that stuff, right? So, it's amazing. It's an amazing experience. Embrace the moment. And go get it. Hopefully I'll be there and see you guys. I'm still working.
Yeah, we hope you'll be here too. Thanks, Amadou. What about you, Yvette? Any advice for our hopefuls this year?
I think it was a bit shaky on my end, like with the network. Can you please tell me back the question?
Yeah, of course. Any advice for the hopeful entrepreneurs getting ready for their semi-final this year? If you remember back on your ABH journey.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you to relax because that's not possible. It's not possible. But just, enjoy the moment, because it's more than just being one of the top 10 and winning the prize money. It's more than that. Like, I think one of the key highlights for me during the whole, ABH journey was to, be able to learn, like, to strengthen my deck, to strengthen my story, to up my game, in the fundraising journey, learn from other entrepreneurs and so forth. So just embrace the process, get the best out of it, and don't just focus on being one of the top 10, because even if you're not one of those, you're already a hero, right? And you're already doing great. And just get the best, make the best connections you can make, learn from the thing. If you don't panic, just learn your lessons and move on. And I think that would be really my key advice.
Thank you so much, Yvette. And we hope we'll have you with you, either if not for the semi-finale, for the finale. I have a quick poll for everyone before you head out. But again, a big thank you to Yvette and Amadou. If you haven't noticed, the chat has been blowing up with people wanting this recording ASAP, wanting your presentations. You have learned, you've inspired and taught, shared so much knowledge to the over 150 people on the call. So thank you both so much for sharing today, and for being with us. It's been great having you with us. And I hope that we'll have you at our semi-finale in September. If not, that we'll have you here in our finale in November. For those of you in Rwanda, I've just shared a link to register for our semi-final. This year, for the first time, we are doing a live studio audience. So Amadou and Yvette, you got to pitch just to the panel of judges, but this year we're putting 50 people in that room to learn from that experience, to see how the judges grill you guys, to hopefully help them on their journey to see what the likes of Fred Swaniker and Hassan Haider are going to be asking of businesses, and also how some strong businesses similar to Amadou's and Yvette's pitch for your inspiration. We also, very exciting, it is ABH's 5th anniversary this year, for those who didn't know that yet, and we are having a grand finale and summit right here in Kigali, Rwanda at the end of November. So if you are going to be around, or if you like to attend conferences and summits, please join us. It's going to be a 2-day event. At the end, the crowning is going to be where we decide this year's winner. As Amadou and Yvette have both alluded to, is very fun. You'll get to meet our heroes. You will get to learn from some speakers. We're going to have some surprises in store for everybody. So trust us, we're going to make it worth your while. Happening right here back in Kigali, where we did it last year. So I hope to see many of you there. If you have any questions, you can pop us an email. We're going to be sending more details, but go ahead and register. It is absolutely free. Most conferences you have to pay for. There's no $100 price tag or anything like that. So come and join one of the most diverse entrepreneurial gatherings from the continent. But thank you all so much for coming and being here today. It's been great having you with us. Amadou and Yvette, it is always a pleasure having you with us. And I've learned a bunch. I'm sure everyone on the call has learned plenty too. So a big thank you again. I hope you both have a lovely evening further, and we'll see you in Kigali later this year.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone. And for all of those who are curious, we will be sharing the recording for this session. It will be posted on our website, on our YouTube channel. We'll be sending it to you so you can go rewatch if you missed anything. But once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our French translators for being with us and keeping our Francophones on the call as well. I hope to see you all in Kigali in November. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye from Kigali.